She was standing in my kitchen at 7 in the morning, wearing her brother's old college sweatshirt and socks that didn't match, pouring coffee into a mug she'd apparently decided was hers. She didn't look up when I walked in, she just said, "You're out of half and half," like this was her apartment, and I was the guest who needed to be informed. I stood in the doorway in yesterday's clothes and thought about how strange it was that this felt completely normal. And then I thought about how long it had taken us to get here, and how many times I almost let it disappear before I understood what it was. My name is Owen Hartley. I'm 38 years old and I work as a structural inspector for a civil engineering firm in Denver, Colorado. It's not a job people ask follow-up questions about at parties. I walk bridges and underpasses and parking structures with a clipboard and a flashlight looking for things that shouldn't be there. Cracks in concrete and rust in rebar, the quiet damage that accumulates over years and goes unnoticed until it doesn't. I've been doing it for 11 years. It suits me in ways I don't need to explain to anyone. I've lived alone in a second-floor apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood since my divorce from Melissa 3 years ago. We were together for 6 years, married for 4 of them. No kids. The split was the kind that doesn't come with a clear villain and doesn't make a good story at dinner. Melissa wanted more noise in her life, more spontaneity, more mornings where something unexpected happened before the coffee was done. She wasn't wrong to want those things. She just wanted them from someone who wasn't me. After the divorce, I got quiet in the way people do when they've stopped performing for an audience. I went to work. I came home. I cooked dinner most nights, simple things. Soup from scratch, sandwiches on good bread, stir-fry with whatever was left in the fridge. I ran on Saturday mornings, the same loop through Cheeseman Park regardless of weather. I read at night. History, mostly. The occasional biography of someone who had done something slow and difficult and important that nobody remembered correctly. I didn't date. I didn't particularly want to. I told myself I was fine with the silence, and mostly I was. Piper Aldrich was Melissa's younger brother's girlfriend. Had been for about 2 years during my marriage. Piper and Marcus had a good run, and then an ugly ending that I heard about secondhand through Melissa. Something about Marcus accepting a job transfer to Phoenix without asking Piper first, which was apparently the most Marcus thing Marcus had ever done. Piper was a graphic designer. She did branding work for small businesses and local nonprofits from her apartment in Fort Collins. She had strong opinions about typefaces and bad opinions about most movies, and when she came over for dinners during the years I was married to Melissa, she would drift out to the back patio after a while, away from the noise, and sit in the one good chair with her wine and her phone and her thoughts. I remember one specific thing about her from those years. She always brought something when she came for dinner. Not flowers or wine, though sometimes those too. She brought small things. A packet of good salt from a farmer's market. A new brand of hot sauce she thought I'd like because she'd heard me mention I cooked a lot. A folded magazine article about structural failures in 20th century American bridges because someone had mentioned my job once and she had apparently remembered. The salt and the hot sauce I used and forgot about. The article I still have, in a folder of things I kept without knowing exactly why. After Melissa and I divorced, and after Marcus and Piper ended, Piper disappeared from my life the way that people who belong to your spouse disappear. You're not enemies. You're just no longer in the same orbit. I thought about her occasionally the way you think about anyone you liked but had no reason to call. Warmly and briefly and then not at all. Then, 14 months ago, she called me on a Wednesday night. When I didn't recognize the number, I almost didn't pick up. Like she'd been holding her breath on the other side of the ring. "Owen, this is Piper Aldrich. I know this is strange, I didn't know who else to ask." I told her it wasn't strange. I asked her what was going on. She had taken on a new client in Denver, a restaurant group that was rebranding 3 locations simultaneously, which was apparently the kind of project that required being in the same city as the client on a regular basis. She was thinking about making the move permanent. She'd found an apartment in the Baker neighborhood, and she was trying to get a feel for the city before she committed to a lease. She asked if I'd be willing to meet for coffee sometime, maybe show her around a little, tell her which parts of Denver were worth her time and which ones weren't. She didn't say I was the only person she knew in Denver, but I could hear it in the particular way she asked, the small, careful politeness of someone who doesn't want to seem desperate but is genuinely at the end of their options list. I said yes. We met for coffee the following Saturday at a place on South Pearl Street that I'd been going to for years. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a latte and a notebook, her dark hair shorter than I remembered, a pen tucked behind her ear. She looked like someone who had been working since early morning and had simply decided that getting coffee counted as a break. We talked for 3 hours. I don't think either of us noticed until the coffee shop started filling up for the lunch crowd, and we both suddenly remembered we were in a public place. She asked about the neighborhoods. I told her about Baker versus Capitol Hill, about which farmers markets were worth the parking situation, about the 16th Street Mall, and why she should avoid it unless she had a specific reason to be there. She told me about the restaurant project, about the client who kept changing the color palette, about how designing for a restaurant was different from designing for anything else, because everyone had feelings about food that they projected directly onto the logo. I laughed at that more than I expected to. She took the apartment in Baker 2 weeks later. I helped her move in on a Sunday in early October. Her place was on the 3rd floor of a building on Elodie Street, a 1-bedroom with good light and a kitchen that was too small for serious cooking, but had a window that looked out over a backyard full of someone else's tomato plants. She had more stuff than I expected. Design books, mostly, big heavy ones with names on the spines that meant nothing to me. A drawing table she'd disassembled herself and reassembled in the corner of the living room before I arrived. A crate of vinyl records that seemed to represent a different phase of her life than the one she was currently in. There was one thing in her apartment that caught my attention. On the kitchen counter, propped against the backsplash, was a small framed piece of paper. It looked like a page torn from a design book, matted in black. The image on it was simple, a diagram of a suspension bridge, structural lines rendered in a clean mid-century illustration style. I looked at it for a moment and then kept unpacking boxes. Over the next month I kept finding reasons to check in. There was a garbage disposal that was making a noise it shouldn't have made. There was a ceiling fan she'd bought at a hardware store on South Broadway that needed to be balanced, which is not as simple as it sounds and is one of those things that slowly drives you out of your mind if you let it go. One evening I brought takeout from an Ethiopian place on Colfax because she'd said she'd never been and I thought she should try it. We fell into a rhythm the way people do when proximity is on their side, and neither person wants to be the one to name what's happening. She started texting me about things she'd discovered in the neighborhood. A record store in a converted bungalow on Cherokee. A taco truck that was only open on Thursday evenings and had a 45-minute wait that was actually worth it. She learned which coffee shop I went to on Sunday mornings and started showing up there with her notebook, sitting at the table next to mine or across from me depending on which felt less pointed. I noticed things. Small things. The kind you're not supposed to notice unless you're paying attention in a way that means something. She knew I took my coffee black. She knew I would never say I was cold outside even when I obviously was, because that was the kind of complaint I considered unnecessary. She knew I preferred taking stairs to elevators in any building under 6 stories because I'd mentioned it once, casually, during a conversation about something else entirely. She knew I kept a pocket knife in my jacket because she'd seen me use it to open a box once, and after that she would hand me things that needed to be opened before I'd had a chance to reach for it. You don't absorb that kind of detail about a person accidentally. You absorb it because you've been watching, and you've been watching because something in you decided a long time ago that this was a person worth watching. I told myself it was just the particular attention of a designer, someone trained to observe the way things work. I told myself it didn't mean anything beyond that. I was wrong, but I wasn't ready to be right yet. There was one moment that should have made it obvious, and I let it slide past me anyway. We were sitting on her kitchen floor one evening, eating dumplings out of the cartons, because she hadn't found her dining chairs yet, which she claimed she was still deciding about. She was telling me about a client meeting that had gone sideways when the restaurant owner's wife had strong feelings about a particular shade of green, and I was listening and watching her talk with her hands, the way she always did when she was annoyed about something, and I thought, clearly and without any warning, this is the best part of my week. And then I put the thought back wherever it had come from and handed her the soy sauce. 6 weeks after she moved in, my phone rang on a Tuesday night. It was Melissa. Her voice on the line was the same as it always was, brisk, purposeful. The voice of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted to say before she picked up the phone. I heard Piper moved to Denver. I confirmed that she had, and you've been helping her settle in. I explained what I'd been doing, the ceiling fan, the garbage disposal, the occasional dinner. All of it was true. All of it was accurate, and I knew even as I said it that Melissa wasn't calling to get the facts straight. She asked me, very precisely, if I was aware that Piper had been difficult to be around during her relationship with Marcus, that Piper had a pattern of attaching herself to unavailable people, that Marcus had told her, more than once, that Piper had a way of inserting herself into situations where she didn't quite belong. She said it the way you say something you've rehearsed. Not angry. Just clean. Designed to land. I'd been married to Melissa for 4 years. I knew how she operated. She was someone who experienced other people's happiness as a mild inconvenience if that happiness had anything to do with someone she'd left behind. She didn't want me back. She just didn't love the idea of me being fine without her, and she especially didn't love the idea of Piper, her ex-brother-in-law's ex-girlfriend, being the reason I was fine. This was not information. This was maintenance. She was maintaining the version of events where she left because I was too quiet and too static and too little, and any evidence that someone might find value in exactly what she'd found wanting was a threat to that narrative. I said I appreciated her calling and ended the conversation as cleanly as I could, but it worked. Not completely, not in any way I could have explained. Just enough. Just a thin layer of doubt, like frost on a windshield, enough to make me careful in ways I hadn't been careful before. The next time I went to Piper's apartment, I stayed on the other side of the room. I fixed the thing she'd texted me about, a loose curtain bracket in the bedroom, and I said I had an early inspection in the morning and left before she'd finished making tea. It was a small withdrawal, barely measurable. But Piper noticed it the way she noticed everything. She didn't say anything. She just watched me go with an expression that was careful and still in the way of someone who has been here before and knows that making it harder never helps. I went home and told myself I was being reasonable. I was not being reasonable. I was protecting something that didn't need protecting with a tool that was doing real damage. It was 2 weeks later that everything shifted. I came over on a Saturday afternoon to help her hang a gallery wall she'd been planning since she moved in. She'd done the layout on the floor first, the way designers apparently do, every frame placed precisely, spacing measured twice. We were working through it piece by piece, leveling each one, when I got to a frame near the center of the arrangement and stopped. It was the bridge diagram, the same one I'd noticed on her kitchen counter the day I helped her move in. Up close, I could see it more clearly. The suspension bridge rendering, mid-century illustrated, clean structural lines, and in the lower right corner of the page, printed small in the original typesetting, Hartley Overpass, Denver, Colorado, 1961. I stood there with the hammer still in my hand. My last name was Hartley. The overpass existed. I'd walked it twice for work years ago. The image on her wall was a page from an engineering survey archive. I turned to look at her. She was crouching by the floor arrangement, adjusting the spacing on 2 frames in the bottom row, her pen behind her ear, her back to me. "Where did you get this?" I asked. She looked up. She didn't look at the frame. She looked at me. "Vintage print shop on Larimer," she said. "Found it a few years ago." "A few years ago." "Yeah." She held my eyes for 1 extra second, then went back to the frames on the floor. I thought it was a good print. Good composition. I hung it on the wall. I didn't say anything else, but it sat in the back of my head the rest of the afternoon. A vintage print shop, a few years ago. The name Hartley in the corner. The fact that she'd framed it, moved it across the state with her, and put it in the center of a wall she'd planned with a designer's deliberate eye. I did not believe in coincidences of that particular shape. I worked in a field where you learned very quickly that nothing fails without a reason, and nothing survives without one either. Everything is the result of something that came before it. I did not ask again. Not then. The following weekend, Melissa called Piper. I didn't know it happened until Piper told me herself, 2 days later, when she texted me and asked if I could come by. Her voice when I got there was the steadiest I'd heard it. She was sitting on the kitchen counter, bare feet, both hands wrapped around a mug, looking at me like she was calculating something. She told me that Melissa had called her. That Melissa had said, among other things, that she thought Piper should know that Owen didn't do well with complicated situations, that Owen needed simplicity and calm, and that adding pressure to someone like him wasn't fair to either of them. That she was saying this as someone who knew me and wanted to be honest. Piper said she'd listened to all of it and then thanked Melissa for her time. She had not argued, she had not defended herself. She had simply listened and then ended the call, And then she had sat in her kitchen for a long time before she texted me. "I want to tell you something," Piper said. "And I need you to let me finish before you say anything." I said okay. She looked at her mug. Then she looked at me. She told me she had known me for 4 years before I was divorced. That during those 4 years she had been Marcus's girlfriend and I had been Melissa's husband. And there was no version of that situation that allowed for anything to be said, felt, or acted upon, so nothing was. She had made a decision so early it barely felt like a decision. This is not mine, it will not be mine. And the right thing is to understand that completely and not make it into a problem. So she didn't. She came to dinners and drifted to the patio with her wine. She brought small things she'd noticed I might like, and made sure they were always slightly indirect. Always something finished and she could explain without explaining. She kept her distance in rooms where the distance was appropriate, and she did not let herself want things that weren't available to want. When Marcus moved to Phoenix and she found herself single in Fort Collins, alone with 2 years of her life and no particular plan, she thought about Denver. She told herself it was about the client, the restaurant group, the career opportunity, and it was. All of that was real. But she also knew, clearly and without a lot of drama about it, that she was making the choice to be in the same city as me, and that she was done pretending she wasn't making that choice. The bridge print, she told me, she'd found it at a print shop in Boulder. 3 years ago, she'd been there for a design conference and had ducked into the shop to kill time and seen it in a flat file and recognized the name in the corner immediately. She hadn't bought it because of the composition. She said all of this steadily, with the particular composure of someone who has had the conversation in their head many times and decided that the version where they are honest is the one they can live with, even if it doesn't go the way they want. When she was done, she picked up her mug and looked out the kitchen window at the tomato plants in the yard below. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "I just didn't want Melissa to be the one who decided what you knew about me." I stood in her kitchen and didn't say anything for what felt like a long time. Outside, a delivery truck double-parked on a lottie, and someone leaned on a horn, and then it passed. The kitchen smelled like coffee, and the particular clean smell of a small apartment, where someone takes care of their space. I thought about the article she'd brought me, the hot sauce, the salt from the farmer's market, the bridge print in the center of the gallery wall, the way she handed me things before I reached for them. 4 years of attention so quiet it looked like nothing, because she had decided it had to look like nothing. And I thought about what Melissa had said, that I needed simplicity, that adding pressure wasn't fair. I knew Melissa well enough to know that this was not concern. This was a woman who had left me because she thought I was a wall, and who could not square that story with the fact that someone else had been watching me for years and finding the wall worth watching. I looked at Piper. She was still looking out the window. Her shoulders were set in the way they got when she was bracing for something she had decided to accept. "The hot sauce," I said. "From the farmer's market, the one you brought to dinner. Kosula-style green label." She looked at me. "I'd mentioned it once at a dinner party to Marcus about something I'd been trying to find. You weren't even in that conversation." She held very still. "You were across the room," I said, "talking to Melissa about something, and you heard it anyway." She didn't confirm it. She didn't have to. I walked over to the gallery wall. The bridge print hung in the center, level exactly placed. Hartley Overpass, Denver, Colorado, 1961. I looked at it for a moment, then I took it down carefully, carried it to the kitchen and set it on the counter in front of her. She looked at it like she wasn't sure what was happening. "Keep it in the living room," I said. "Not the kitchen. It deserves better light." She looked up at me. "You framed it," I said. "You moved it across the state. Don't bury it in a corner." Nothing happened quickly after that. That's the honest version of it. I didn't stay that night. I went home and I sat with it. I made dinner and I sat with it more. I went to work on Monday and did an inspection on a pedestrian overpass in Lakewood and thought about the way things hold up under pressure and the way they don't and what the difference usually is. On Tuesday night I texted her. "Taco truck on Thursday," replied 11 minutes later. "The wait is 45 minutes. I typed back, "I know. I already know that." She sent a single punctuation mark, a period, which from Piper meant she was smiling and wasn't going to say so. What followed was the kind of beginning that doesn't look like a beginning when you're in it. There were no declared intentions, no moment where either of us sat across from the other and said something that needed to be remembered. We just started showing up for things together in the way people do when they've stopped pretending they need a reason. I started keeping a spare travel mug at her place for Sunday mornings. She started picking up the specific granola from the grocery store on South Broadway that I'd mentioned exactly once in a longer conversation about something else. She drove to inspections with me twice when the sites were in interesting locations, bringing her sketchbook and working quietly in the truck while I did the walkthrough, and then asking me questions on the drive back that nobody had ever thought to ask me before. On a Wednesday in February, she called me from the grocery store. "What do you want for dinner?" She said it the way you say something you've said 100 times, easily, like there was no version of the question that didn't include me. I told her what I wanted. She came over. She cooked, which she was better at than I'd expected, and I sat on the kitchen counter and talked while she worked, and we ate at the table with the good light coming through the window, and there was nothing about it that felt new. Melissa called one more time. It was Sunday morning in March, early, while I was still in bed. I answered because I was barely awake and wasn't thinking. Her voice was different, not sharp, not surgical, just tired in the uncomplicated way of someone who has stopped performing. "Are you two together?" she asked. I told her we were. There was a pause. "I figured," she said. "I want you to know that I don't think I was wrong about us, but I think I might have been wrong about you." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, "Thank you," and I meant part of it, and we hung up, and I lay there in the early morning light listening to the sound of Piper making coffee in the kitchen, the particular sounds of it, the water running, the cabinet opening, the familiar scrape of the mug she'd decided was hers against the counter. I didn't need more than that. I didn't need declarations or grand acknowledgments or anyone's permission. I just needed the coffee sounds and the morning quiet and the knowledge that the quiet, this time, was full. There is a framed print on the living room wall of Piper's apartment. Ours, I should say. We moved her things into my place 8 months ago. The living room has better light and more shelf space, and the kitchen is big enough to actually cook in. Which print is? The one she bought in Boulder 3 years before she ever called me. Mid-century line illustration, suspension, bridge. Structural rendering, clean and spare. In the lower right corner, in the original typesetting, Hartley Overpass, Denver, Colorado, 1961. I walk past it every morning. Sometimes I stop, not because it's remarkable, because it reminds me that some things find their right place eventually, not by force, not by announcement, but by patience and small decisions made in rooms where nobody was watching. Some people spend years paying attention to the right thing before the world gives them a reason to say so. The ones who wait long enough don't have to say much when the moment comes. The wall knows. The light knows. That's enough.